Just a peek behind the curtain here. When I record intros, when I record solo episodes, hell, when I'm making TikTok videos, I almost never do retakes. I think about what I want to say, I get it out as quickly as possible, and then I move on. If I think about something too much, I know that I won't post it. I'm very self conscious about the content I'm putting out, about its quality, about, even down to the words I use, the space between words. Anytime there's an I overthink those things quite a lot. And so by just rushing through, by just forcing myself to do it and then posting it, I don't have to think about it again and I can just move on. So, how's that relevant to what I want to talk about today? Well, I have recorded 4 or 5 different versions of a story I want to tell. Different intros, different ways to approach it, different ways to frame it. And I don't know if it's right yet. It is a topic I have joked about from time to time on the show. It is a topic that I do bring up. It's not something I hide, but I don't talk about it in depth or talk about the actual experience too much. And because of some other things that I'm working on, both on this show and on another show that's in progress, I think it's important to lay more of a groundwork for why those things matter and why I'm talking about them. But I don't know how to do it yet. So I'm just going to do it. I'm Zach Van Nuss, and this is Grinding to a Halt. I have this very clear memory from when I was 9 years old. I was in a Sunday school classroom. We were playing a game of hangman, which is in and of itself a weird thing to be doing in a Sunday school classroom. But I was called on to come up and pick the word and kind of lead the class in the game of hangman. And I remember the rule being it had to be a word that was more than 6 letters, and it had to be something from the Bible. So here I was at 9 in front of the class, unable to spell a word from the Bible that was more than 6 letters. Because at this point, I was unable to read. I could, on sight, pick out, hey, I know what that word is, but it wasn't an ability to read. And so I absolutely had no ability to spell, especially a word that was over 6 letters. It was completely beyond my capacity, and I was terrified. I remember at this time, anytime there was a situation where I was called on to read or something like this where I was supposed to get up and spell a word, I would get this instant migraine. And I now know as an adult it's a stress headache. It's a stress response to a situation I was in. And so I remember this crippling headache in front of the class, and I distinctly remember starting to cry and trying to hide it because I was embarrassed and I felt stupid. And I felt like everyone else was capable of something that I was incapable of, and that it was my fault. But it wasn't. It wasn't my fault. So I've talked about being homeschooled before, sometimes in jest, sometimes joking around. But legitimately for me and for, some of my siblings, I know there's varying degrees to this. We were just kind of left on our own and weren't really taught anything. And so at this point, at 9 years old, standing in front of this class, even though I had never been taught how to read, I had never been taught how to spell, I stand there thinking it's my fault, that I am broken, that something is wrong with me, and I am deeply embarrassed and deeply ashamed. And it created this type of self loathing I had that is something I still, if I'm being honest, deal with to this day. I still feel like a failure. I still feel like I'm incapable. And I still feel like it's my fault. I'm working through it, but I still very much feel those things. So I look back on moments like that, and I'm not mad. I feel like people just try to write off when someone talks about a traumatic childhood as them being mad or petty or, like I said up top, wanting to be a victim. And I'm not mad. There's nothing for me to be mad about. I was absolutely wronged, and it was never, no one attempted to correct it. And because of the way homeschooling in America works, there's almost zero oversight. No one was checking in to see if we were doing anything, to see if we were learning, to see if we were at, the reading level we should be for our age. There was none of that. The very first test I ever took was for my learner's permit to drive. I had never taken a test before that. And I was terrified, absolutely scared shitless, because I didn't even know how to approach taking a test. It wasn't something I had any sort of concept of, it wasn't something I could practice. I wouldn't even know how to go about that. And it wasn't something I felt comfortable asking for help with, because it was just this secret that I tried to keep from people around me because I didn't want to talk about it, whether that be friends or, I didn't go to school. So people at church, Sunday school teachers, just try to hide it, ignore it, find ways around it. And in my mind, try not to get caught was how I thought about it. And so I just lived this life of trying to deflect this thing that felt like a shortcoming, that felt like this thing that I was doing wrong. And I didn't know how to reach out and ask for help. And even if I would have known how, I think I would have been too embarrassed because it was something everybody else could do that I couldn't. So it felt like it was my fault. So why talk about this? What does this have to do with anything? And I'm talking about it because it's not unique. I've had a couple conversations over the last few weeks with people who have had a very similar experience, who were homeschooled and never taught things, or very selectively taught things to keep them under some sort of control, or to filter out the things that the parents or guardians viewed as unhelpful to them, or whatever the case may be. And there's also this book called Educated by Tara Westover, and it's about her experience being raised homeschooled and only being taught selective things, and then once she got out into the world, realizing how much had been kept from her and how wronged she was. And when I read that book, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, it was the first time I had really encountered a story that felt like it was mine, where every page I was relating to so many of the things that she was going through and experiencing. And so that got me to start talking about it a little. It got me to start reaching out to some groups or seeking out groups that are doing work in this space. And I'll link out to one specifically, CRHE, the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. I will link out to them and to the work they're doing. And it's not an anti-homeschooling organization. It's about setting up guidelines. So people like me and people like Tara and people like the individuals running CRHE don't fall through the cracks again. That they're not being wronged by the people who are supposed to be educating and protecting them. So other people don't have to experience the same things we did. and don't have to fend for themselves or go into the world feeling wholly unprepared for what's in front of them. So I just want to talk about it more. I think it's important to shine a light on experiences that you felt unique to you. And then once you get out into the world, you realize not only are you not the only one who has felt this, but there's a lot of people who have, and they are looking for someone who has a similar story because it makes them feel less alone also. It can feel so isolating to, in the group, even within groups of friends, and it's nothing any of my friends were doing wrong, but to be the only one who was incapable of something made me feel alone, even in a group of people that I cared about and I knew cared about me. And it was something that I felt like I couldn't talk about. So now that I feel like I can talk about it, I feel a responsibility to talk about it. I feel a responsibility to direct people towards it, to shine a light on it, and to call it out. There was always this view of my family as like this big group of people who are also close, and they're kind of like this ideal version of what a family could be. And from the outside, I get it. But on the inside, and I can't speak for everyone, and I don't want to, but for me, it was a miserable experience. I felt, even in a home of 7 kids, like I was alone, that no one had my back and no one was watching out for me. And so when I talk about not having communication with my family or not speaking to them, or, people like to use the term cut off, but when I just kind of walked away, it was really easy because it didn't feel like I was walking away from anything. It just didn't feel like anything changed. And I think that might be sadder than I even realize, but it's what's best for me to not even have to pretend that there was a relationship there when I know there wasn't. And I don't know if anyone there even wanted there to be one. I am a difficult person. I am aware of that. I have very strong opinions. I have very strong feelings. And I have a lot of conviction in the things that I do. I think a lot of that comes from feeling so alone all of the time. A lot of that comes from having to teach myself how to do most of the things I know how to do. So I built this self-reliance and this version of myself where I could do things on my own and I didn't need approval, I didn't need help, and I could just power through. And that's something that has its benefits, and it has, definitely a downside as well, because it can make me seem like I'm a huge asshole. But sometimes self-preservation can make you seem like an asshole. And sometimes walking away isn't an act of anger, isn't because you're mad, but it's because you're preserving yourself, or you're removing yourself from a situation that you know over time will erode you. Even if it's not actively harmful, it can still have negative effects in the long run. And for me, being around those people that at my core I do not feel like had my best interests at heart or cared enough to have a conversation with me about things that were done or were not done, or things they disagreed with. Everything was just swept under the rug, and I cannot live my life that way, and I refuse to live my life that way. And so I want to talk about it. I want to put it out there. I want people to know that other people have experienced what they're experiencing. People have walked away from those situations and they don't feel guilty about it. They feel better about having done it, and that their lives can improve by doing it. That's why I say you can't burn a bridge that's already collapsed. That bridge had already collapsed. Walking away was nothing because I was walking away from nothing. So if there are things that you feel are unique to you or to your experience, I would just encourage you to try to find people who are actively talking about those experiences, because just knowing that someone else has felt that or gone through that is helpful. And if you can't find anyone else that's talking about it and you are comfortable doing it, talk about it, post about it, start a podcast, message me, come on this one and we can talk about it. I think there's so many things that we just refuse to normalize, whether it be mental health, suicidal ideations, burnout, things like being neglected at home. You're homeschooled and no one is teaching you anything. Those things are worth talking about, and they're worth finding other people who have felt them as well, so we can spread awareness that these things are happening. I have had people not believe me when I tell them that at 10 years old I couldn't read because no one had taught me. Because to them it's an unfathomable thing to keep your kids home and not teach them anything. They can't grasp it. So people assume that I'm lying or that I am just trying to get attention. And so when we normalize these conversations, when people talk about it more, when people start to grasp what organizations like CRHE are doing, it helps them understand that there is this gap and there is this need and that action needs to be taken. So it seems like I'm rambling, and I probably am, but I don't know how to talk about this yet. But I feel like I have to talk about it. So if you listened, I apologize if it was weird and awkward and probably too long, but I have to start talking about it in a more in-depth way because there's things I'm working on that will require me to really focus on this and really start to have deeper conversations around it. And at 34 years old, it's not something I have fully processed or learned how to talk about yet. So I'm learning how to talk about it. Thanks for listening.